Are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Hi, I'm Brian Hyde. Welcome to Nowhere to Hide. This edition is all about making the world safe from hate. Now, that's a pretty tall proposition. I mean, after all, humankind and human nature is kind of prone towards hateful ideas and sometimes hateful words and occasionally hateful actions. But is there a way that we can stop this from happening? We can prevent it from ever happening in the first place? Some people think so, but the way they're going about fighting it may or may not be the best possible solution. Let's take a look at a piece here from the Idaho Press. Idaho gets united against hate. Stunning and brave. I mean, how many people out there do you know? I mean, seriously, how many people within the mainstream of society are out there saying, the world would be a better place if we just hated each other more? But when you're virtue signaling, you've got to make a public declaration of what you're against it. So here we are. We're all against hate. Wow, that must make you a really good person. Well, maybe. Let's find out exactly what that means. So this rally taking place in Coeur d'Alene, as you can see, here's the Coeur d'Alene Rejects Hate banner underneath the LGBTQ flag. Interesting. So I'm going to just, stick my neck out here and say, obviously, if we're going to rid the world of hate, it's likely in the cause of protecting the woke agenda. Isn't that really what it's all about? It's just making the world a place where hate has no place. Unless, of course, you don't approve of or don't agree with that woke agenda, in which case that hate is absolutely fine to be wielded against you. And there's no stopping point for the cancel culture crowd to vent their hate upon you. It's just right. It's the only sin that's left is to not agree with what the wokesters are doing. So as far as this rally in Coeur d'Alene, a United Against Hate event that recently drew roughly 200 people in North Idaho was just a piece of an ongoing campaign. Now, this is the key part, not just in Idaho, but nationwide, to build community capacity to respond to and prevent hate crimes and incidents. Now, a hate crime, obviously, a hate plus crime, we know those are both really bad things, but what specifically does that look like? Let's hear from some of the people who are involved here. United Against Hate is a nationwide initiative launched by U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland. But the November 17th gathering in northern Idaho was among the largest events thus far across the country. Really? And it only drew 200 people? Okay. I mean, I'm not bagging on your numbers, but if this was one of the largest events across the country, doesn't seem like this is catching on so much. The underlying goal is to connect communities, especially marginalized communities, to law enforcement and resources. This is from an attorney by the name of Hurwitz, who is the U.S. attorney for the District of Idaho, and also to build an understanding of the tools we have at the federal level and with our state partners to address hate incidents and hate crimes. Now, they set the bar very, very low, though, for what constitutes a hate incident or a hate crime. And the key thing is, it's not just a matter of, what a person is doing. Hate crimes are based upon what a person is thinking when they're doing something that may be criminal. Tony Stewart, co-founder of the Kootenai County Task Force on Human Relations, said it was a tremendous boost to we who have been involved in this work for so long and how one counters hate. I could not be more pleased. They made a real great distinction between when something is protected by the First Amendment, like hate speech, and illegal actions. So I at least see an admission that, what some may consider hate speech may nonetheless be protected by the First Amendment. It empowers us to know more information when we're working with possible victims. And this is one of the keys of woke ideology is there has to be a victim. In fact, the more victims, the better, because as a victim, you are not responsible for your circumstances. Victims never are. Furthermore, as a victim, if you challenge anything that I tell you, you are victimizing me further. So if you don't feel bad and do what I say, well, you're adding to my victimization. Therefore, you are one of the oppressors. And, it's all fair game to go after you, in this case, with the power of the state. Now, look, I think rooting hate out of our lives is actually a very laudable goal. I don't agree with using the power of the state and trying to impose it from the top down. In fact, I think that's probably the least productive way to do it. But before we go any further, let's take a look at some actual incidents that were given as examples of this is why we need this effort, and this is why hate crimes are on the rise here in Idaho. So one of the cases that they referenced was 3 brothers in a pickup festooned with a dirt swastika. Don't see that very often, right? Stopped at the home of a local man who is Latino and began harassing him. Now, harassment is illegal, but when they returned with a gun and a pit bull, see, this is where they are crossing the line. Now you're threatening or menacing or perhaps engaging in aggravated assault if you're actually pointing the gun at him or menacing him with a pit bull. All 3 were convicted. I believe 2 of them served or were sentenced to 5-year prison sentences, while the one with the gun, who is a felon, wasn't permitted to have firearms, went to prison for up to 9 years. Now, it's already illegal to harass people. Okay, the reason behind it and how dirty your pickup is and somebody's artwork on your pickup really isn't the issue. If you're harassing people, and especially if you're using a gun or you're using a dog to harass them, you've crossed the line to where you're actually victimizing someone. But hey, let's celebrate. These guys are going to be in prison for a long time. Here's another example. In another case, an intoxicated Post Falls man began harassing a Latino man who was with friends visiting bars in downtown Coeur d'Alene, and after hurling racial epithets, punched the visitor in the face. Now, I don't know how many street fights you have seen, but racial epithets, no matter the color of the participants, are pretty much a standard thing that comes out of people's mouths. They're popping off, they're venting, in some cases foaming at the mouth. It's not that it's the right thing to do, but it really has no bearing on the actions that were being taken. What was wrong here was someone engaged in assault and battery by punching this visitor in the face. The defendant was convicted of malicious harassment and sentenced to up to 5 years in prison. Again, I don't care what he was thinking. I care about what he was doing. And if he was punching someone in the face, that's the crime for which he should answer. What was in his heart or what was coming from his lips as he was angry doesn't matter. A person can pop off and still not be a racist. Don't believe me? Just look at any of the rappers out there or any of the Hollywood celebrities who regularly use bad words but somehow get away with it because, I don't know, they're special or something. Now, in the third case, a black man had stopped with his family at a rest stop near Coeur d'Alene when the defendant began repeatedly harassing him, telling him to leave, and pulled a large knife. Okay, assault with a deadly weapon or threatening with a deadly weapon. The defendant pleaded guilty to malicious harassment and was sentenced to up to 5 years in prison. So in each of these cases, you had people crossing a criminal line by either introducing a weapon or physically assaulting someone or openly harassing them. But again, what their attitude was or why they were acting in a hateful way doesn't matter as much as their actions. The only objective measure is what did they actually do that resulted in a victim. Because the problem here is if you allow certain thoughts to be criminalized and punishable by law, that's a list that can be expanded forever and ever. And it sure appears that the woke are in the process of expanding that list to include anything that dissents from whatever they want to do. What? You're not down with the drag queen story hour? Well, that's hate speech. That ought to be punished. You're not happy with your kids being force-fed CRT in the classroom? Well, that's hateful talk. Because after all, this is about victims and about oppressors. And you can see where this would go. Getting the state involved really should be a last resort, and it should only take place when there is an actual victim. And what that means is solving hate is not going to happen from the top down. It's not going to happen as a result of laws. You know what laws can do? They can enhance resentment and divisions by forcing people together and forcing people to interact with people that they really wouldn't rather interact with. And I don't care what the reason is. It could be a rational or an irrational reason. I'm not going to hang out with gangbangers because that's just not my thing. But to sit there and pretend that, somehow the only way we can do this is if the power of the federal government or the power of the state government is brought to bear and made to used to make people think correct thoughts. Nope, that's a little too big brotherish for me. That's a little too close to the realm of thought crime. Now, I know that the Patriot Front arrests back in June have been on a lot of people's minds, and this is something that Idaho Press also reported on. Patriot Front member pleads guilty to disturbing the peace. Really? That's the best we could do? I mean, come on. These guys were here to disrupt a pride rally. I mean, they were going to violently riot, or they conspired to do so. But it was a plea bargain for disturbing the peace. Listen to this. Alex N. Sissenstein, 27, of Midvale, Utah, pleaded guilty to the misdemeanor charge on Monday, the Coeur d'Alene Press reported. Prosecutors said Sissenstein and other Patriot Front members planned to violently disrupt a pride celebration in the northern Idaho city of Coeur d'Alene. The men were arrested June 11th after they were found packed into the back of a U-Haul truck with riot gear, kind of like their Antifa counterparts whenever they show up in public. Just interesting coincidence, I'm sure, near the city park where the celebration was underway. All 31 were initially charged with conspiracy to riot, which is a misdemeanor. Okay, it was a conspiracy. They didn't actually riot. There wasn't any actual victims, but they might have been fixing to do something, so better to charge them, with this conspiracy to riot. Now, listen, in exchange for Sissenstein's guilty plea, prosecutors asked that he be sentenced to roughly 6 months in jail, but that the jail time be waived if he successfully performs 2 years of unsupervised probation. First District Judge Maylee Walsh agreed and ordered Sissenstein to pay a $500 fine. Now, this is the first person in the group to plead guilty to a charge in connection with the arrests. Several others have pleaded not guilty and are awaiting trial. Look, if these guys were the menace to society, we need stronger hate crime laws and we need more government involvement, you think they would have hung something a little bit heavier on them than simply disturbing the peace? For crying out loud, you can catch a disturbing the peace charge simply for yelling at someone or burping in public or swearing in public. It's kind of a catch-all. And the fact that he's being released on unsupervised probation for a couple of years, no jail time besides, there's a 6-month jail sentence hanging over his head. Again, it's to send a message that, certain types of thought are not approved, but it also seems to really inflate the actual threat to the community. And more than anything, it's supposed to put us on notice that, hey, there are certain thoughts you're just not allowed to think or certain things you're not allowed to disagree with, because essentially the way that event was portrayed was anybody who was against this Pride Festival, anybody who wasn't happy with, a month-long Pride celebration somehow is in league with Patriot Front, who they just can't help calling a white supremacist organization at the behest of the professional alarmists at the Southern Poverty Law Center. You want to see some interesting history? Look at the history of the Southern Poverty Law Center, and you'll see that why this is hardly the altruistic group that's there just to try and root hate out of our society. They're a pretty self-serving left-wing think tank, an activist organization, and anything to the right of Karl Marx, well, that's just terribly, terribly dangerous. So how far can this go? I don't know if I really want to know the answer, but I'm going to give you just a little snapshot of where it's going. Look at this. Monkeypox is renamed Mpox by the World Health Organization after claims the decade-old term was racist and discriminatory towards Africa. Really? Because it said the word monkey. We're immediately supposed to assume that's talking about Africa. That's talking about Africans. I mean, I'm sorry, but anybody who immediately leaps to that conclusion probably has some racist skeletons in their own closet they ought to be dealing with. I mean, are we going to have to outlaw Curious George books and so forth because it might reflect negatively on Africa? Where does it stop? I think the point is it doesn't, which is why you don't need to let this get a toehold. What needs to happen if you really are serious about rooting out hate is you start with yourself. It's an individual choice to live as a good person, to treat other people according to the golden rule. And if you do that, something amazing happens. Society does change right there where you are. No, it's not a wholesale change, but it's not forced either. And real virtue has to be freely chosen, meaning a person could freely choose to engage in racist thought or maybe even, racist language. But when you choose to treat others the way you want to be treated, well, you're talking about something that's actually actively eradicating hate. And it doesn't require force, and it doesn't require some rigid mental, limitations on what you're allowed to think versus what you aren't. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.